All right, let's get it going here to close out. Get ready to close out the day here, and this is always an interesting topic, especially when you're talking about kind of the beginning in 2013 with the data breaches, and everybody remembers Target. That was kind of the big one, and people became very familiar with the term data breach. And even though we kind of forget about it now, it's still a major milestone in some ways in the industry. So, with that being said, I want to welcome our next keynote speaker to the stage, and that is Ruston Miles. He is the founder of Bluefin. Ruston?
Thanks, Will. So yes, 2013, the big breach that kicked it all off, right? There was a couple before that, TJ Maxx and others, but that was the one that a lot of folks really, it kind of changed the things. Everybody had a touch point with Target. And it was an interesting breach in that it was fully preventable with the technology we have today, point-to-point encryption and tokenization in the combo. Quite frankly, malware in the systems that got in there through the age-old way of a vendor opening up a back door and malware getting in, right? Authentication could have helped with that. Vendor attestations and vendor compliance could have helped with their HVAC vendor from getting in. Encryption in the terminals could have stopped the data from getting out. Tokenization at rest. All these things that exist today. So sometimes these cautionary tales, we all learn our lessons from, and the industry gets better. And certainly that's what I did with Bluefin. The founder of Bluefin started it in 2002. And lo and behold, in 2012, we decided to create point-to-point encryption, or P2PE. And PCI had this standard on the shelf back since, God, I want to get this right, 2011 or 2009, something like this. And nobody had picked up the standard. Nobody had figured it out. Nobody had wanted to do it. I think a lot of folks were hoping no one would do it, otherwise it would raise the bar. So we decided, hey, let's go ahead and let's be the first. So Bluefin was the first in North America to provide a P2PE validated solution. And that came out about a month before the Target breach. So all I can say is that was a really good marketing boost for our company, really bad for Target. And no, we didn't plan it. It wasn't part of our marketing plan. But anyways, point being is that I think everybody knows that it was sort of a breach a week and then 1,000 a year, and we kind of went through the last decade with a lot of breaches. And I was sort of a wild man in the wilderness waving my hand for P2PE and tokenization. We saw a big influx and a lot of importance put around EMV, the chip in cards, right after Target. And at the time, it was frustrating because we had the answer, which was encryption, right? Chip cards, great. Make sure that you don't have a fraudulent card or someone that the point of sale that the card is not, well, I guess that's it, that it's not a fake plastic card, because without the PIN, it's still, you can still have a lost or stolen one. But really, fixing fraud at the point of sale with a chip card doesn't stop that point of sale from breaching and exposing that data out. And it turns out that on those chip cards, they still had the full number. Maybe you couldn't go recreate a magnetic stripe with that data, but you could get that 16-digit card number and use it online for e-commerce fraud. And so there became this whole life cycle of fraud where you'd have the hackers getting the data, selling it on the dark web to fraudsters who'd come back in the front door and commit fraud. So there was so the best thing though that I'd say that came out of the EMV chip revolution was it caused a lot of vendors, everybody really, to go ahead and upgrade their terminals, upgrade their credit card machines, upgrade their points of sale in order to support this. Which means at the same time they were paying for upgrades from their own Trans 330s that were kind of dumb machines, right, that were really old. They're upgrading that. These new devices had the capability or the option to support things like point-to-point encryption and tokenization. So it really then created the roads. And then all we had to do is spend a lot of time convincing merchants and providers, hey, just turn it on. Let's actually be secure while we're fixing chargebacks related to fraud. So anyways, just a quick aside there. Let's go back and talk about some of our lexicon. What is a data breach? We've all gotten, as Will pointed out, we've all gotten kind of numb to it because it's been happening across multiple industries, not just within payments. Certainly payments is a very fast way for a breach or compromise to be monetized, to be immediately turned into cash on the dark web. It might be a little bit more difficult for PII or PHI, personal health data. Someone would have to conduct a more intensified overtake of someone's identity in order to profit from that. But they're getting better and more sophisticated at that now. And so we're seeing a lot more of those kinds of hacks. I bring this up, I know it's super simple, but one of the ways that we gain knowledge, as human beings, or the main way, is just basically learning distinctions, right? There's, what's a road? Well, started off as a beaten down path by horses, and then it turns into a gravel road like I grew up on, and then it's macadam or blacktop, and then it's concrete, and then there's railroads, all kinds of roads. Distinctions, yes, they're all roads, but they're all different and for different purposes, and different things happen. So I think we've learned over the last decade that breaches, it's an all-encompassing term, but that there are, the more that we've learned, there are different ways that we can approach security to them. For example, when we think breach, well, what is a breach? A breach is someone getting into something. They've breached the network defenses. They've been able to get through the front door. But does that necessarily mean a compromise of the data, right? Someone can get in the network, someone can get in your house because you leave the door unlocked, but you've got your valuables in a safe. Maybe that data is protected, and so the breach doesn't result in a compromise. And I think this is important because some of this lexicon starts to go to the technologies behind the scenes that we can employ to say, hey, they're going to get in eventually no matter how hard we try, but once they get in, and if they get in, can they actually compromise the data? And maybe it's embarrassing if someone breaches your house, eats a banana, slips on a banana, breaks some furniture. Maybe people don't feel safe coming to your parties anymore. But if they didn't steal the valuables, you might be able to repair the relationship. And that's what happens with a lot of these breaches where, hey, someone gets in, they get the data, that's the bad part. But if they get in and all they've done is got in, what's the real point to them? So we'll talk about technologies here in a little bit that we see employed in order to prevent that. We'll go through this one quick. Obviously, there's been a lot of breaches across all sectors. It used to be a lot towards payments. Because folks can more quickly take PHI and PII and create identity attacks, we're seeing all sorts of other industries being attacked. Also, sometimes it's not even financial gain, right? Sometimes it's just to provide a denial of service or from a state actor. 17.2 billion records compromised. Obviously, everyone's seen the Cisco breach that's happening, so even now the folks that are supposed to be securing us are having difficulties as well, so that no one is unaffected in this onslaught. In today's OMNICHANNEL, we've got all sorts of different attack vectors, right? In the beginning, it may have just been web, or it may have been that machine sitting on the retailer's desktop. But now we've got mobile, retail, e-commerce, contact center, unattended, and really these are all interconnected. And we want them to be, because as was said earlier, we want the customers to have convenience, and they want that omni-channel environment. But where are we at now with the cost of all of this? Interestingly enough, the average cost per record for a data breach was on a tear up, of course, through the last decade, and then we had a couple blips down that Danielle and our marketing research team had found. And what's interesting to find, if you go back and map this against the slide 2 ago, where you see the breaches that happened and the number of records breached, those years are like when you might have Equifax, where there's like billions and billions and billions of records exposed by a single vendor. And so it's economies of scale backwards then, where the average cost per record is actually down because there's so many. But it's not an indication that things have gotten better. That's actually an indication that things got worse in those years. It's just that the vendor had to pay less because of the economies of scale of fixing a billion records. You get some savings on that, evidently, especially if you're Equifax and you already have contact to be able to easily reach out and out to customers for remediation, et cetera. But it's for the rest of us, it's bad and it's getting worse. And what we see in certain sectors where the hackers are turning their focus is where they can get the confluence of personal data, PHI data, and PCI or card data. So think about educational institutions, healthcare, think about insurance. Those are really some of the top ones where someone can get lots of data that they can correlate and sell in different markets. Let's talk about the threat vectors. It's our old standbys. A lot of these on the right side of the screen kind of clump together. So phishing, right? We're talking about authentication. We're getting at getting the authentication data. Hey, we've got two-factor authentication, right? Or we've got a password and a username, but we can now phish or spear phish. We can steal those credentials to be able to get in. So those are really two of the main vectors that kind of go together. We look at cloud misconfiguration. Hey, it's great that you might have security. You might have a really secure cloud vendor, but have you left the door open? So you've got a lock, but you have not locked it correctly because it's confusing and it's new to the organization. Third-party software vulnerability and vendors, that's the age-old one that we talked about with the target breach, that there was a vendor involved. Malicious insiders, these are employees. We're starting to get to areas where, hey, it doesn't matter if you employ multi-factor or two-factor authentication, you've actually got an insider. So these are some of the attack vectors that are at the top of the scale. How do we protect against this? There's really two thoughts here. One is to defend the data, and one is to devalue the data. Defending the data is trying to keep the bad guys out, build up high walls and firewalls, and they're going to try to go under, over, or through those. This is your defensive depth, your perimeters. Artificial intelligence, hopefully you've got in place to tell you a breach happens before 200 or 300 days. I think that's the average now, somewhere between 200 and 300 days before a merchant even knows that they've been hacked. And that's the worst, right? It's bad enough that you've gotten breached. If you could have caught it on day one, you could have really kept that down to 30,000 records, and now it's 300 days, and you're at 30 million records, and it's really, really bad. And so AI and these kinds of technologies can come in to find that. So these are all important. Identity and access management, so think of two-factor authentication. All these kinds of things are trying to keep people out. But if they get in, we want to make sure that they don't get anything, and that's where devalue the data comes in, and those are our friends, encryption and tokenization. It's a little bit small on your screen, but let's. This is from the same report. We're looking at the IBM report as well as the Ponemon. As you can see, here's some key factors that affected the total overall cost of that breach. That AI was interesting, right? Artificial intelligence being number one, and that really comes to the fact that these breaches that go on for 200 and 300 days, they really start to get expensive over time, okay? You don't want a breach to happen at all. This is the way I would look at it, or you don't want a compromise to happen at all. However, getting to cost is how long is that sickness going to stay in the body before it's done its damage. Hey, DevSecOps, are your folks taking a real security approach, security first approch? That's really important, right? You need to build security in. It needs to be not an afterthought where we try to secure things. It needs to be the very very upfront. Interestingly enough, going along with the very first one, formation of an incident response team. A lot of times companies find out about these things and they don't respond quickly. The humans don't. Thankfully, the fourth on the list is my favorite, extensive use of encryption. The first ones all talk about, hey, make sure you develop stuff that's secure, make sure you respond to these things when they happen, but hey, let's make sure that if they get in, when they get in, they get nothing. And then on down the list. So hopefully you can get a hold of this after and just kind of go through your organization and make sure that you're set up properly with these things that really exacerbate the cost of these breaches. And kind of to wrap up here, everything's becoming digitalized. And yes, it is digitalization, not digitization. Thank you for that fix. But throughout the pandemic, it's forced us all from the remote's perspective, to work from home, pay anywhere, do anything. It's forced this confluence and convergence. And so this is really increasing the attack vector. It's also increasing hackers had a lot of time during that time to stay at home and learn and figure things out too. We didn't see as many breaches during the pandemic, and that's because a lot of them, I believe, were just waiting in the weeds, building their technology, getting it out, so when we get back out and we start using these devices and POSs and get our normal lives, they were going to start. So I expect to see a big uptick beyond this. And I don't think anyone's immune to it. I think, to wrap this up, I think that protecting the data is important. I think when we talk about mobile and we talk about what's next, we're going to see a transition from trusting each individual merchant with sensitive cardholder data to a completely tokenized system. Our company, Bluefin, offers something called Shield Connects, and others do too. But what this is a way to secure data of any kind, PHI, PCI, PII, in that it takes the data out of the merchant's hands. And I think that's the real future. And as we move towards mobile, being able to have the factors of authentication there for access from the payer, but simply just taking the data away from the merchants, I think, is where we need to wind up here. And with that, thanks for letting me go over a little bit.
Thank you.
To your last slide there with regard to ransomware, so is devaluing the data a valid strategy in the case of a ransomware attack?
So ransomware, what we're seeing with ransomware is they're getting a little bit more tricky with it, right? They'll put the malware in there. They'll sit there and siphon off the credit card data as long as they can, and then it'll make a financial decision to say, I'm not getting anything good here, so this software flips over to be ransomware, and we'll just hold the whole system hostage. So two things there. Number one, yeah, we should be not letting them get that data. They should get to that decision quicker. Then when they ransomware the data, that data, if it's tokenized, means that your token provider has it off-site for you. So you do have some access to the data. You don't have it completely held ransom. So I think it helps in the first case of the whole overall attack. It helps a little bit in the second case where your data is off store. Does it fix ransomware? Holding something hostage is a different kind of attack. But I think it can prevent some of the complicated effects from ransomware. Mm-hmm.
Very tricky.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I got a quick question.
Sure.
I remember when that stuff started happening with Target, and this is completely maybe regulatory issues. It was always talking about doing like a national data breach type of alert system.
Mm-hmm.
Any insight into why that never came to be, or why that was never?
So a lot of the states started adopting rules about how you needed to come forward with this information quickly. So that really made a big change there. So we really started that happening. There are groups out there where this information is shared. The interesting thing is that this becomes sensitive information to the actual merchant themselves, because it could put them at further risk. And also, so I think that that's why there is some bit of sensitivity to it. We talk about security from the perspective of what happens in a breach. Then we talk about compliance within the industry. But then really what's happening, and it's coming over from Europe, we have it in California and some states now, there's the privacy laws. And this is where it's like everything that we've done for payments over the last 10 years to secure it starts to make sense in the privacy laws to help protect other kinds of data. And that's why you see companies like Bluefin and others extending our services to secure other kinds of data for healthcare. Final thing, so we were doing a lot of point-to-point encryption for healthcare and institutions. And they came to us and said, boy, you fix 100% of 10% of our problem. So I was like, oh, that's a product right there. So that's why you're seeing a lot of companies branch out into these other kinds of data to protect it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.